You finally land on Venus. At first, it doesn't look that dangerous. A thick sky, glowing orange, clouds moving slowly above you. It feels quiet, almost calm. But then, everything changes. The heat hits you first. Not like sunlight on Earth, more like opening an oven and stepping inside. The ground beneath your feet is hot enough to melt metal. You try to breathe, but the air is poison. The pressure around you builds, crushing, heavy, like the weight of an entire ocean pressing on your body. And you realize something. This isn't just another planet. This is the closest thing to hell in our solar system. And you won't last a minute. Welcome to falling into space. And if you're ready to experience what it's really like to land on Venus, don't forget to subscribe, because this is where survival ends. Before you even land on Venus, the danger has already begun. From space, Venus looks almost peaceful, a bright, glowing sphere covered in thick white clouds. It reflects more sunlight than any other planet, shining like a calm beacon in the darkness. But those clouds are not harmless. They hide everything. As you begin your descent, the first thing you notice is how quickly the light changes. The sun starts to disappear behind layers of dense atmosphere. The brightness fades into a soft orange glow. Shadows become weaker, almost non-existent. You are no longer entering a normal sky. You are entering something much heavier. The upper atmosphere of Venus is already dangerous. Winds move at incredible speeds, much faster than anything you experience on Earth. Entire layers of clouds circle the planet in just a few days, driven by forces that are still not fully understood. If you were floating here, you would be carried rapidly across the planet without any control. As you descend deeper, the temperature begins to rise. At first, it feels manageable. Then it climbs, steadily. The clouds around you are not made of water. They are made of sulfuric acid. Tiny droplets of acid fill the air, forming thick, toxic layers that stretch across the entire planet. If any part of your equipment is exposed, it begins to corrode, slowly at first, then more aggressively. Your visibility drops. The deeper you go, the thicker the clouds become. Light struggles to pass through. Everything around you becomes darker, more enclosed. You cannot see the surface. You cannot even see how far you still have to fall. The pressure begins to increase. At high altitudes, it is still close to what you would feel on Earth, but it does not stay that way. Every kilometer you descend, the weight of the atmosphere above you grows. You start to feel it, not directly, but through the strain on your equipment. The structure around you tightens, the systems adjust, trying to compensate. But the deeper you go, the harder it becomes. Now the heat is no longer subtle, it builds faster. Unlike Earth, where temperature changes can be gradual, Venus increases it continuously as you move downward. There is no relief, no cool layer waiting below, only more heat and more pressure. The descent feels longer than it should, not because of distance, but because of what is happening around you. The atmosphere is so thick that it slows everything down. Falling through it is not like falling through air. It is closer to moving through a heavy fluid. You are surrounded, enclosed. At some point, you begin to see shapes below. The surface is finally becoming visible. dark, rocky, flat in some areas, broken in others. It does not look alive. It does not look active. But it feels overwhelming. Because by the time you can see it clearly, you are already deep inside one of the most extreme environments in the solar system. The temperature is now approaching levels that would destroy most materials. The pressure continues to rise, and your systems are under constant stress. There is no moment where everything stabilizes. Everything is getting worse. Now you are close, very close to landing. The descent slows, not because of control, but because the atmosphere is so dense that it resists movement. You are almost floating down. And then you reach the surface. There is no dramatic impact, no violent crash, just a heavy contact. The ground is solid, but the air around you feels thick, heavy. The sky above is still glowing dimly through layers of clouds. You have arrived. But nothing feels right. The heat is intense. The pressure is constant. The environment is completely hostile. And this is only the beginning. Because landing on Venus is not the challenge. Staying there is where everything goes wrong. The moment you realize what it truly feels like to stand on Venus, everything changes. It's not a sudden shock. It's a constant pressure, building all around you. The ground beneath you is solid, but the air feels heavy, almost thick enough to touch. Every movement feels slower, like you're pushing against something invisible. The heat is everywhere, not just on your skin, but surrounding you from every direction. It doesn't come in waves. It doesn't fade. It stays, constant and overwhelming. Your body isn't built for this. Even with protection, your systems are struggling to keep up. Cooling systems are working at maximum capacity, trying to push the heat away, but there is nowhere for it to go. The atmosphere traps everything. There is no escape for the heat. It simply stays, building around you. Breathing is impossible without support. The air is thick with carbon dioxide, completely unfit for life. If your equipment fails, even for a moment, the effect is immediate. Not just suffocation, but burning. The chemicals in the atmosphere react aggressively. Even small exposure would be enough to cause serious damage. You try to focus on your surroundings. The landscape is empty. Endless rocky ground, stretching in every direction. No water, no movement, no sign of life. It feels like a world that was abandoned long ago, but the stillness is deceptive, because everything here is active, just not in a way you can see. The heat is constantly rising from the ground. The atmosphere is pressing down from above, and between them, you are trapped. The pressure continues to increase the longer you stay, not suddenly, but steadily. It pushes against your body, your equipment, every surface around you. It doesn't stop. On Earth, pressure changes are small. Here, it dominates everything. Your suit begins to feel tighter, not because it's shrinking, but because the environment around you is forcing itself inward. Your systems are under stress. Warnings start to appear. Temperature rising, cooling efficiency dropping, structural strain increasing. Nothing is failing yet, but everything is close. Time feels different here. Seconds stretch longer, not because they are actually slower, but because every moment carries weight. You know you don't have much time. and the planet doesn't give you any chance to adapt. The sky above you remains the same dull orange. No clear sun, no stars, just a thick layer of clouds blocking everything beyond. It feels isolated, completely cut off from space. You are not just on another planet. You are inside it, surrounded by its atmosphere, its heat, its pressure. There is no sense of distance, no sense of openness, only containment. The ground beneath your feet shows signs of volcanic activity, rock formations shaped by heat and pressure over millions of years. Some areas are smoother, as if they were once molten. Others are rough, broken, unstable. This is a planet that has been reshaped many times, and it may still be changing, but none of that matters right now, because your focus is no longer exploration, it's survival. Your systems continue to struggle. Heat keeps rising. Pressure keeps building. Every second adds more strain. You try to move, but it takes effort. Even a simple step feels heavier. The atmosphere resists you. The ground radiates heat upward, and the air presses down from above. You are caught between two forces, both working against you. At this point, you begin to understand something clearly. This is not a place where humans can exist, not even briefly. The conditions are not just extreme, they are absolute. There is no safe zone, no moment of relief, no adjustment period. Everything here is already at its maximum, and it stays that way. Your equipment starts to reach its limits. Cooling systems are no longer enough. The internal temperature begins to rise, slowly at first, then faster. Warnings become more frequent, more urgent. You are running out of time, and there is nothing you can do to stop it, because Venus does not give you options. It does not give you time to react. It simply continues, applying pressure, heat, and force without pause. You look around one last time. The landscape is unchanged, silent, still, unforgiving. And in that moment, you realize something important. Landing here was never the challenge. Surviving even a single minute was. The longer you remain on Venus, the more everything begins to fail in ways you can't stop. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, it's small. A slight delay in your systems, a warning that appears, then disappears, a minor fluctuation in temperature that feels manageable. But nothing here stays small. The heat continues to rise inside your suit, not because the outside temperature is changing, but because your protection is no longer strong enough to keep it out. Every second, more heat gets trapped, and less of it escapes. Your cooling system is working harder than it was ever designed to, pushing against an environment that refuses to release energy. Eventually, it reaches its limit. And when it does, the temperature inside begins to climb. Slowly at first, then faster. You start to feel it, not just as warmth, but as pressure from within. Your breathing becomes heavier, not because of the air, but because your body is trying to deal with the heat. Sweat cannot cool you here. Evaporation doesn't work in this environment. The air is too dense, too saturated. Your body has no way to regulate itself. Now the pressure begins to affect more than just your movement. It starts to impact your equipment. Seals weaken. Materials begin to deform. The structure that was protecting you is now under constant stress from every direction. And there is no moment where that stress decreases. It only increases. Your visibility is still limited. The thick atmosphere blocks most of the light. Everything looks dim, muted, distant. You cannot see far enough to find anything useful. Not that it would matter. There is nothing here that can help you. The ground beneath you continues to radiate heat upward. The air continues to press down. You are trapped between forces that never stop. Now your systems begin to shut down. Not completely, but piece by piece. A sensor fails, then another. Your suit can no longer measure temperature accurately. It can no longer maintain internal balance. The warnings are constant now, but they don't change anything because there is nothing you can do to fix them. This is not a situation you can recover from. It is a countdown. Your movements slow even more, not just because of the environment, but because your body is beginning to reach its limits. The heat inside your suit continues to rise. Your muscles respond more slowly. Your focus begins to fade. Everything becomes harder, even thinking clearly. The pressure remains constant, unchanging, unrelenting. It does not crush you instantly, but it never gives you a break. Your equipment was designed to handle extreme conditions, but not for long. And time is exactly what you don't have. Now the structure around you begins to weaken. Not visibly at first, but internally. Materials expand under heat. They lose strength. They begin to fail. And when one part fails, others follow. Your protection is no longer complete. The environment begins to enter. Even in the smallest way, it is enough. The air outside is not just hot, it is chemically aggressive. It reacts with everything it touches. And now it has a way in. You feel the change immediately. The temperature spikes, the internal pressure shifts. Everything accelerates. This is no longer a gradual decline. This is the moment where failure becomes unavoidable. You try to move, but your body is too slow, too heavy. Your systems can no longer respond. Everything that was protecting you is now breaking down. The environment of Venus does not hesitate. It does not adapt to you. It simply continues, exactly as it always has. Hot, dense, unforgiving. And now it is reaching you directly. There is no recovery from this point. No way to reverse what has started. Because the planet does not give you second chances. It only gives you time. And that time is almost gone. Now there is no separation left between you and the planet. What was once outside your protection is now inside it. The heat is no longer something you can measure. It is something you feel in every part of your body. It doesn't come from one direction. It surrounds you, fills the space, presses into everything at once. Your systems are no longer responding the way they should. The numbers you relied on are no longer stable. Readings spike, then disappear. Some sensors stop completely. Others give values that don't make sense anymore. You are losing control, not suddenly, but steadily. The pressure continues to build around you. It hasn't changed in intensity, but now that your protection is failing, you begin to feel its full effect. It's not a sharp force, it's constant, heavy, unmoving. Your movements are slower now, not because you choose to move slowly, but because your body is struggling to respond. Every action takes effort. Even standing still feels difficult. The air around you remains thick and toxic. There is no relief in breathing, no sense of freshness. Even with support systems, the environment feels suffocating. The ground beneath you is still radiating heat upward. It hasn't changed, but your ability to resist it has. What once felt distant now feels immediate. The sky above you looks the same as before, a dull orange glow through dense clouds. No clear light source, no sense of direction, no change. Everything around you is stable. Only you are changing. Your equipment is no longer protecting you fully. Small failures have become larger ones. Systems that once compensated for the environment are now unable to keep up. The internal temperature continues to rise. Your body reacts. Your breathing becomes uneven. Your focus fades in and out. Simple thoughts become harder to hold. You are not adapting. You are reaching a limit. The structure of your suit begins to weaken further. Materials that were designed to withstand pressure and heat are losing their strength. Connections loosen. Layers separate. The environment does not need a large opening. Even the smallest failure is enough. The air begins to enter more freely now. The difference is immediate. The temperature rises sharply. The chemical composition of the atmosphere begins to interact directly with what remains of your protection. You feel the change instantly. There is no delay. There is no adjustment. Your body cannot respond fast enough. Everything accelerates. Your vision becomes unstable. The dim orange light around you blurs. Shapes lose their clarity. The horizon disappears into the haze. You try to stay focused, but it becomes harder with each second. The pressure does not increase suddenly, but its effect becomes stronger as your protection weakens. It presses inward, reducing your ability to move, to react, to function. The heat continues to rise. There is no cooling anymore, no balance, no system left to slow it down. Your movements are now minimal, not because you stopped trying, but because your body cannot keep up with what is happening. The environment has taken over. There is no longer a barrier between you and Venus. Everything that made survival possible is gone. The air, the pressure, the heat, all act together without interruption. There is no single cause, no single moment where everything changes. It is a continuous process, a steady breakdown. The planet does not rush. It does not need to. It simply remains the same, while everything around you reaches its limit. Your awareness begins to fade. Not instantly, but gradually. The signals your body sends become weaker. Your reactions slow even further. The world around you becomes less defined. The orange sky, the dark ground, the heavy air, all begin to merge into one indistinct environment. There is no sound that helps you understand what is happening. No movement to follow. Only pressure and heat, constant and unchanging. This is not an event. It is an outcome, a result of conditions that were never survivable. And now, there is nothing left to resist them. Venus does not become more dangerous. It remains exactly as it was. Only your ability to exist within it has ended. And in that final moment, one truth becomes clear. This world was never meant to be visited. It was never meant to be survived. It simply exists as one of the most extreme environments in the solar system, and it does not change for anything. What remains now is not movement or reaction. It is the environment itself. On Venus, nothing pauses, nothing slows. The planet does not respond to what happens on its surface. It continues exactly the same, moment after moment. The heat remains constant. The pressure remains constant. The air remains thick and unchanged. If there were anything left to observe, you would notice how stable everything is. There are no sudden shifts in weather like on Earth. No cooling winds. No clouds breaking to reveal light. The atmosphere moves slowly at the surface. Even though high above, powerful winds circle the planet. Down here, everything feels still. That stillness is what makes it more extreme, because there is no relief hidden anywhere, no cooler region, no safer place. The ground stretches outward in all directions, flat plains mixed with rough volcanic rock. Some areas look smoother, as if they once flowed like liquid before cooling into solid form. Others are fractured, shaped by stress and heat over long periods of time. This is a world built by heat. Most of the surface has been reshaped in the past by volcanic activity. Lava once covered large regions, erasing older features and creating the terrain that exists now. There are no oceans to absorb energy, no vegetation to change the environment. Everything is controlled by temperature and pressure. Even time feels different here, not because it moves differently, but because nothing changes fast enough to mark it. There are no day-night cycles in the way you experience them on Earth. The thick clouds block direct sunlight, and the slow rotation of the planet means that any change in light is gradual and barely noticeable at the surface. You would not see the sun clearly, only a dim glow through layers of atmosphere. This makes the surface feel isolated, completely separated from space. If you look upward, you don't see the sky in the usual sense. You see a ceiling, a dense, glowing layer that never opens. And beneath it, the surface remains locked in the same conditions. The air is heavy, dense enough to carry heat efficiently, dense enough to slow movement. Sound would travel differently here, lower, more compressed. Every vibration would feel closer, more immediate. But there is no life to create those sounds, no movement to disturb the stillness. Venus is not empty, but it is silent. Even the strongest machines struggle here. In the past, probes sent to this planet survived only for a short time before failing, not because of a single issue, but because everything works against them at once. Heat damages electronics. Pressure weakens structures. Chemical reactions slowly break down materials. There is no single failure point, only continuous stress. And eventually, everything reaches its limit. This is why exploration of Venus is so difficult, not because it is far away, but because it is completely unforgiving. Other planets present challenges: cold, radiation, lack of air. But Venus combines all of its challenges into one place. There is no margin for error. Even orbiting the planet shows how extreme it is. The clouds that hide the surface reflect most of the sunlight, making Venus one of the brightest objects in the sky when seen from Earth. But that brightness is misleading. It hides what is happening below. A world where the surface temperature remains high enough to melt metals, where the pressure is strong enough to crush unprotected structures, where the air itself is toxic and corrosive. And yet, from far away, it looks calm. This contrast is what makes Venus so unique. It appears similar in size to Earth, often called Earth's twin. But in reality, it followed a completely different path. At some point in its history, something changed. Its atmosphere thickened. Heat became trapped. Water, if it ever existed, disappeared. And once that process started, it could not be reversed. The planet entered a state that continues to this day. A stable but extreme environment. Not changing quickly, not evolving towards something new, just remaining as it is. This is what defines Venus. Not just its temperature or pressure, but its permanence. A world where conditions have reached an extreme and stayed there. And that is why survival is impossible. Not because the planet reacts violently, but because it does not react at all. It simply exists in a state that nothing like you can endure. And it will continue that way, long after everything else changes. If you step back from the moment and look at the bigger picture, something even more unsettling begins to appear. Venus did not start like this. It became this. Long ago, Venus may have had conditions very different from what you see now. There is strong evidence that it could have once had water, possibly oceans, a more balanced atmosphere, temperatures that were not as extreme. It may have looked closer to Earth than anything you have experienced so far. But something changed. The heat from the sun increased. Water began to evaporate. And as water vapor entered the atmosphere, it started to trap heat. More heat led to more evaporation. More evaporation led to more heat. A cycle that fed itself. This is known as a runaway greenhouse effect. Once it began, it could not stop. The oceans, if they existed, disappeared. The atmosphere became thicker. The temperature continued to rise. And eventually, the planet reached the state it is in now. A surface so hot that it cannot cool. An atmosphere so dense that it traps everything. What you are experiencing on the surface is not random. It is the final result of a long process. A process that pushed the planet beyond a point of recovery. This is what makes Venus important. Not just as a place, but as an example. Because it shows what can happen when a planet loses balance. On Earth, the atmosphere regulates temperature. Oceans absorb heat. Clouds reflect sunlight. These systems work together. But on Venus, that balance was lost. And once it was lost, it never returned. Now imagine what that means. Two planets, similar in size, relatively close to each other, but completely different outcomes. One supports life, the other destroys it instantly. The difference is not distance alone. It is how the system evolved. How small changes over time became irreversible. And how a stable environment can turn into something extreme. Back on the surface, the conditions you feel are not temporary. They are not part of a cycle. They are permanent. There is no cooling phase, no recovery, no moment where the planet resets. The temperature does not drop at night. The pressure does not decrease. Everything stays at its maximum. And because of that, nothing like Earth can exist here. No liquid water, no breathable air, no environment where life can begin. Even the chemistry of the surface is affected. Rocks interact with the atmosphere. Materials break down over time. Everything adjusts to the heat and pressure. Everything becomes part of the same system. This is not just a hostile environment. It is a complete transformation. A planet that moved from one state to another and stayed there. And this leads to something important. Venus is not just dangerous because of what it is now. It is dangerous because of what it shows. That planets can change completely. That condition can shift beyond recovery. That environments are not guaranteed to remain stable. And when you look at it from that perspective, the experience becomes something more. It is not just about survival. It is about understanding. Understanding how a planet evolves, how systems interact, how balance can be lost. And once you see it that way, the surface of Venus is no longer just a place you cannot survive. It becomes a warning, a reminder that even worlds similar in size and origin can end up completely different. And that the difference between a habitable world and an uninhabitable one can be defined by processes that unfold slowly but never reverse. Venus does not change quickly, but everything about it is the result of change that already happened. And now it simply continues, exactly as it is. If you step even further back and stop thinking about a single moment on the surface, you begin to see something different. Venus is not just a place where survival fails. It is a system that has reached its final state. Nothing here is temporary. Nothing is waiting to change. The temperature is not rising anymore. It already reached its limit. The pressure is not increasing anymore. It already stabilized at its maximum. The atmosphere is not evolving into something new. It has already become what it will remain for a very long time. This is what makes Venus different from many other worlds. On Earth, everything changes. Weather shifts. Seasons come and go. Temperatures rise and fall. Even on Mars, there are dust storms, seasonal cycles, and variations over time. But here, those variations are almost gone. The environment has settled into a constant state, and that constant state is extreme. If you could observe Venus for days, weeks, even years from the surface, you would not notice dramatic differences. The sky would remain the same dull color. The light would stay dim. The heat would never drop. There is no relief built into the system. This stability might sound calm, but it is the opposite, because it means the planet has no way to correct itself. No natural process left that could cool it down or reduce its pressure. Everything that could have balanced the system is gone. Water is gone. Thin atmosphere is gone. Temperature control is gone. What remains is a closed system. One where heat is trapped. One where pressure is locked in place. And that system feeds itself. The thick atmosphere keeps heat near the surface. The hot surface prevents cooling. Nothing breaks the cycle. This is why Venus does not slowly become more dangerous over time. It reached its extreme long ago and stayed there. Now imagine trying to build something here. A structure, a machine, a base. It would not just need to survive high temperature. It would need to survive constant high temperature. It would not just need to resist pressure. It would need to resist it without interruption. There would be no moment where stress decreases, no phase where systems can recover. Everything would need to work perfectly all the time. And even then, it would only last for a limited period. Because materials degrade, electronics fail, structures weaken. Not because of sudden events, but because of continuous exposure. That is the key difference. Venus does not destroy things instantly in a single dramatic moment. It breaks them down over time, slowly, relentlessly, without pause. And because there is no variation in conditions, there is no opportunity to adapt. On other planets, challenges can be managed. On Venus, they accumulate. Every second adds more stress. Every moment pushes systems closer to failure. Now think about exploration again. Sending a probe to Venus is not just about landing. It is about surviving long enough to collect data. Every minute matters, because each minute brings more damage, more heat, more pressure, more chemical interaction. And eventually, even the strongest designs stop working. Not because they were weak, but because the environment is absolute. And this brings you back to the original idea. Landing on Venus is possible, but staying there is not. Not because of a single factor, but because everything works together in the same direction. Heat does not drop, pressure does not change, air does not become safer. There is no balance, only a fixed state that continues without interruption. And that is what defines this planet. Not just how extreme it is, but how stable that extremity has become. A world that does not fluctuate. A world that does not recover. A world that simply remains exactly as it is. When you stop thinking about survival and look at the bigger picture, something else becomes clear. Venus is not just extreme on the surface. It is built that way from the ground up. Deep below the rock you see, the planet still holds heat from its formation. That heat moves slowly upward, feeding the conditions above. It does not escape easily. The thick atmosphere traps it. This creates a closed system. Heat rises from below. It gets trapped above, and it stays there. On Earth, heat can escape into space. Oceans absorb energy. The atmosphere moves it around. On Venus, that process is broken. There is no large body of water to store heat. There is no thin atmosphere to let it escape. Everything remains contained. Even the rotation of the planet adds to this feeling of isolation. Venus spins very slowly, much slower than Earth. A single day on Venus lasts longer than its year. But at the surface, you would not notice much difference. The clouds above are so thick that they hide most of the change in light. There is no clear sunrise, no clear sunset. Only a slow shift in brightness that never fully reveals the sun. This makes time feel constant. You cannot rely on the sky to tell you anything. Everything feels the same. Now think about the surface again. It is not covered in craters like the moon. Many of those marks were erased in the past. Large amounts of lava resurfaced the planet, covering older terrain. This means the surface you see is relatively young compared to other planets. But that does not mean it is active in the way you expect. There are signs that volcanic activity may still happen, but it is not something you would easily see while standing there. Everything moves slowly. Changes take long periods of time. And in between those changes, the planet remains stable. This stability is what makes Venus so difficult to study. You cannot stay long enough to observe detailed changes from the surface. You cannot rely on long-term equipment. You must gather as much information as possible in a very short time. And even then, you only get a small piece of the full picture. This is why most observations of Venus come from orbit. From above, you can study the clouds, measure the atmosphere, track movement over time. But from the surface, your time is limited, very limited. Now imagine what it would take to change this planet, to make it cooler, to reduce its pressure, to create conditions where something like life could exist. The scale of that change would be enormous. You would need to remove a large part of the atmosphere, reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, allow heat to escape, possibly introduce water again. But none of this is simple. The system is too stable in its current state. Any change would require massive energy and long periods of time, far beyond anything currently possible. This means Venus will remain as it is for a very long time. Not because nothing can change it, but because changing it would require altering the entire system. And that system is deeply rooted in how the planet formed and evolved. Now compare that to Earth again. Small changes can affect the climate. Small shifts can influence the environment. On Venus, the system is already pushed to its extreme. There is no small adjustment that can fix it. Only large-scale transformation. And until that happens, the planet remains locked in its current state. Hot, dense, unforgiving. Everything you experience on the surface is not temporary. It is the natural condition of the planet. And that condition is maintained by forces that do not weaken. Heat from below, pressure from above. Trapped energy that has nowhere to go. This is what defines Venus at every level. Not just as a surface environment, but as a complete planetary system that has reached its limit and stayed there. When you step away from everything you've experienced so far, one final idea becomes clear. Venus is not dangerous because it reacts to you. It is dangerous because it does not. Nothing on this planet changes to make things easier. There is no moment where the environment becomes less intense. No shift that gives you time to recover. Everything remains constant. And that constancy is what makes it impossible to survive. On other worlds, there are patterns, cycles, moments where conditions improve, even slightly. Here, there are no such moments. The temperature does not drop. The pressure does not release. The air does not become breathable. Everything stays exactly where it is. And because of that, time becomes your biggest limitation. Not distance, not movement. Time. Every second you spend here adds more stress, more heat, more strain. There is no way to pause that process. Even if you do nothing, the environment continues to act on you. Now imagine trying to extend your time. Better protection, stronger materials, more advanced systems. It would help, but only for a while. Because the planet does not stop applying pressure. It does not stop applying heat. Eventually, every system reaches a point where it cannot continue. And that point always arrives. This is why missions to Venus are measured in minutes, not days. Even with careful design, the environment limits how long anything can function. And once that limit is reached, there is no recovery. Now think about exploration in a different way. Instead of landing on the surface, imagine staying above it. At certain altitudes, conditions are less extreme. The temperature is lower. The pressure is closer to what you experience on Earth. In those layers, it might be possible to float, to stay suspended in the atmosphere instead of touching the ground. This is one of the few ways Venus could be explored for longer periods. Not by fighting the surface, but by avoiding it. Because once you reach the ground, the environment becomes too strong, too complete. Everything works together in the same direction. Heat from below, pressure from above, toxic air surrounding you. There is no weak point. No single factor you can solve to survive. You would have to solve all of them at once. And even then, you would only delay the outcome. This is what makes Venus one of the most extreme places in the solar system. Not because it changes suddenly, but because it does not change at all. It has already reached its maximum. And it stays there. Now compare that to Earth one last time. On Earth, life exists because conditions are balanced: temperature, pressure, atmosphere, water. Each of these elements works together to create an environment where survival is possible. On Venus, those same elements exist, but in the wrong form. Too much heat, too much pressure, too much carbon dioxide. Everything is out of balance. And once that balance is lost, it cannot easily return. This is the final lesson of Venus. It is not just a hostile world. It is a stable one. Stable in a state that does not allow life. Stable in a way that prevents recovery. And because of that, it remains exactly as it is. A planet where survival is not about skill, not about preparation, but about limits. Limits that are reached almost immediately. Limits that cannot be pushed further. And once you reach those limits, there is nothing left to do. Because Venus does not give you time. It only takes it away. In the end, nothing about Venus feels dramatic. There is no sudden explosion, no final moment where everything changes at once. It is quiet. The planet does not react. It does not respond. It does not even acknowledge what is happening on its surface. Everything continues exactly the same. The heat remains. The pressure remains. The sky stays the same dull color. If you could step back and observe it from a distance, nothing would look different. The surface would still stretch out under thick clouds. The atmosphere would still glow softly from above. There would be no sign that anything had happened. This is what makes Venus different from the way you imagine danger. On Earth, danger often comes suddenly, fast, visible. Here, it is constant. It does not need to change to be effective. It simply exists at a level that nothing like you can endure. And once you understand that, everything becomes clear. The challenge was never landing. It was never exploration. It was always survival. And survival here was never possible. Not because of one condition, but because of all of them together. The heat alone would be enough. The pressure alone would be enough. The atmosphere alone would be enough. Combined, they leave no room for anything else. Now think about the planet itself. It continues its orbit around the sun, unchanged. It reflects light back into space, appearing bright and calm from a distance. From Earth, it looks like a shining object in the sky, beautiful. But that image hides everything beneath it. It hides a surface that has reached one of the most extreme states in the solar system. And that contrast is what defines Venus. It looks similar to Earth in size, close in distance. But its path was completely different. At some point in its history, small differences became large ones. Those differences became permanent. And now the planet remains in that final state, not evolving into something new, not returning to something old, just continuing, exactly as it is. And that is why it feels so final. There is no sense that the planet will change, no sign that conditions will improve. Everything has already happened. What you see now is the result. A world where the environment has reached its limit and stayed there. And when you think about landing here, you begin to see the truth. It was never about what you would do. It was about what the planet would do to you. And the answer is simple. It would not change. It would not adapt. It would not slow down. It would simply remain what it is. And in doing so, it would take everything from you. Not through violence, not through sudden force, but through consistency, through conditions that never weaken, through a system that never gives you a chance. And when it is over, nothing is left behind. No mark, no trace. Only the same surface, the same sky, the same atmosphere. A planet that continues without interruption. Unchanged, unaffected. Exactly as it was before. And exactly as it will remain. If you step away from the surface and stop thinking about a single moment, something else becomes clear. Venus does not need to prove how extreme it is. It simply exists that way all the time. From orbit, the planet looks almost perfect. A smooth sphere covered in bright clouds, reflecting sunlight back into space. It shines more than any other planet you see from Earth. It does not show what is happening below. Those clouds form a complete cover. They hide the surface entirely. No direct image can pass through them in visible light. Everything you know about the ground comes from radar and short-lived missions that reached it, not from simple observation. This makes Venus feel distant, even when it is close. You can see it in the sky, but you cannot see into it. And that distance hides how complete its environment really is. The atmosphere is not just thick, it is layered. Different levels, each with their own conditions. Higher up, the temperature is lower, the pressure is less intense. In those layers, the environment is closer to what you would experience on Earth. Not safe, but less extreme. This has led to an idea. Instead of going down to the surface, you stay above it. Floating cities, structures suspended in the atmosphere where conditions are more manageable. In theory, this is one of the few ways humans could remain on Venus for long periods. Not by fighting the planet, but by choosing a level where it is less hostile. Because once you descend too far, everything changes. The deeper you go, the more the atmosphere compresses, the more the temperature rises, until you reach the surface where all those effects combine at their maximum. That difference between layers shows something important. Venus is not uniformly extreme at every level, but the surface is where all extremes meet. And that is what defines the experience you have been following. Now imagine the planet over long periods of time. Thousands of years, millions of years. From your perspective, nothing changes. The surface remains the same. The atmosphere continues to trap heat. The pressure stays constant. But over very long time scales, small changes still happen. Volcanic activity may reshape parts of the surface. Gases may be released into the atmosphere. But these changes do not reduce the intensity. They maintain it. They keep the system active, which means Venus is not frozen in time. It is stable, but still functioning, still releasing energy, still maintaining its extreme state. And because of that, it will not cool quickly. It will not suddenly become more like Earth. Any change would take an enormous amount of time and energy, far beyond anything that happens naturally in short periods. This is why Venus remains one of the most difficult planets to approach. Not because it is far away, not because it is hard to reach, but because once you arrive, everything works against you. And there is no easy solution. Other planets present problems that can be solved one by one. On Mars, you deal with cold and thin air. On the Moon, you deal with vacuum and radiation. On Venus, everything is present at once. Heat, pressure, toxic atmosphere. And they are all at their highest levels at the surface. There is no simple protection that handles one factor and makes it safe. You must handle everything at the same time. And even then, only for a short period. This is what makes Venus unique. Not just how extreme it is, but how complete that extremity is. It does not rely on sudden events or rare conditions. It maintains its environment constantly. And that constant state is what defines it. Now, when you think about landing there, the idea changes. It is no longer about exploration or discovery. It is about understanding limits, understanding how far conditions can go, and what happens when a planet reaches that point and stays there. Because Venus is not changing toward something else. It has already reached its outcome. And everything you experience there is part of that final state. A system that continues without interruption. A world that does not give you time and does not need to. Because it has already become everything it will be. At this point, there is nothing left to test. Nothing left to push further. Because everything about Venus has already shown you its limit. What remains is understanding. Understanding that this planet is not extreme by accident. It is the result of a path that led here, step by step, until nothing could change it anymore. When you look at it now, you are not seeing a process in motion. You are seeing the outcome of that process. A surface that cannot cool, an atmosphere that cannot release heat, a system that cannot balance itself again. And because of that, everything stays the same. There is no recovery built into Venus, no natural mechanism that will slowly bring it back to a more stable state. It has already passed that point. And once a planet passes that point, it does not turn back. Now imagine time moving forward. Millions of years, billions of years. From your perspective, Venus will still look the same. The clouds will still cover the planet. The surface will still be hidden. The heat will still be trapped. Even as other planets change, Venus will remain close to what it is now, because the forces that created its environment are still active. The sun continues to provide energy. The atmosphere continues to trap it. Nothing interrupts that cycle. Now compare that to Earth one last time. On Earth, small changes matter. Temperature shifts can affect oceans. Oceans affect the atmosphere. The atmosphere affects life. Everything is connected in a way that allows adjustment. On Venus, that flexibility is gone. The connections still exist, but they no longer create balance. They reinforce the same outcome. Heat leads to more heat. Pressure maintains pressure. Nothing breaks the cycle. This is why Venus is often used as an example. Not because it is simply dangerous, but because it shows what happens when a system becomes locked. Locked in a state that does not change. Locked in conditions that cannot support life. And when you think about landing there, that idea becomes very clear. There was never a moment where you could succeed. Not because you did something wrong, but because the environment itself does not allow success. It is not a challenge to overcome. It is a limit that cannot be crossed. And once you reach that limit, everything stops. Now step away from the planet completely. Look at it from far in space. It is quiet again. A bright sphere covered in clouds, moving along its orbit like any other planet. From this distance, nothing seems unusual. There is no sign of the heat, no sign of the pressure, only light reflecting back into space. And that is the final contrast. From far away, Venus looks calm. Up close, it is one of the most extreme environments you can imagine. But the planet does not change between those two views. Only your perspective does. And that is what defines the entire experience. Not the moment you land, not the moment systems fail, but the realization that this world was always like this. It did not become dangerous when you arrived. It was already at its limit. And it will remain there long after you are gone. In the end, there is nothing left to change. Venus does not shift. It does not react. It does not move toward a different state. It simply continues. Everything you experienced, every limit you reached, was not a moment in time. It was the nature of the planet itself. From the first second to the last, nothing about Venus needed to become more extreme. It was already there. That is what makes it feel final. There is no second attempt here, no improved version of the same experience, no adjustment that makes it survivable. Because the problem is not one thing you can solve. It is everything at once. The heat cannot be reduced. The pressure cannot be avoided. The air cannot be changed. And because all of it exists together, there is no path forward. Now, when you think back to the moment of arrival, it feels different. Landing was never a beginning. It was the moment you entered a system that was already complete. A system that does not open, does not adapt, and does not leave space for anything else. Everything that followed was just time passing inside that system. And time, on Venus, only moves in one direction, toward limits. toward the point where nothing can continue. Now imagine the planet without you. Nothing changes. The surface remains the same. The sky stays dim and covered. The heat continues to move between ground and atmosphere. There is no sign that anything happened. No trace, no mark. Venus does not record events like this. It does not preserve them. It simply continues under the same conditions. This is what separates it from the way you understand environments. On Earth, changes leave marks. Movement creates evidence. Time reshapes the surface. On Venus, the conditions are so constant that small events disappear into the larger system. Everything becomes part of the same unchanging state. And because of that, the planet feels distant, even when you imagine standing on it. Not just physically distant, but completely separate from anything familiar. Now, take one final step back. Look at Venus as a whole, a planet close in size to Earth, formed from the same early materials, following a similar path in the beginning, but ending somewhere completely different. That difference is not small. It is absolute. One world supports life. The other removes any possibility of it instantly. And that contrast is the final point. Venus is not just a dangerous place. It is an example of what happens when a system crosses a line it cannot return from, a point where balance is lost permanently. And once that happens, the outcome does not change. The planet does not move back. It stays, locked in its final state, hot, dense, unforgiving. Everything you experienced was part of that state, not an event, not an accident, but the natural condition of the planet. And now, when you think about it, the idea becomes simple. You did not fail to survive Venus. Survival was never part of the equation. The planet was never meant to allow it, and it never will.